The next thing we're going to talk about is data types. So data in GIS comes in basically two major types, and we can expect to find a feature class and surface rasters. Or for the purposes of this study, we'll just call it rasters versus vectors in a more generic sense. So one of these images is a raster and the other one is a vector. And just by simply looking at the differences between these two images, you can immediately see, just simply visually, the differences between the two. So the image on the left is a raster and the one on the right is a vector. So what are some properties of a raster that you can immediately see just from studying the difference between the image on the left and the image on the right? So surfaces, or rasters, will contain numeric values in each of its cells. So if you notice right away, the image on the left has a bit of a grid pattern, and inside each of the cells or the grids here inside, in the boxes, there are different colors, and each color can represent a numerical value. So a raster image, this means, contains a matrix of information. Each cell is going to be equal in size, containing data representing some geographic value of that location, such as elevation. So for the sake of discussion, let's just say that maybe this little grid thing that we're seeing up here on the left is elevation data. So all the colors that are very dark would be very low in elevation. All the colors that are very bright would be very high in elevation, and everything that's in between would be elevation that's kind of in between the very low and very high areas. So each cell can contain a numeric value describing the elevation. For example, it could say 103, 102, 105, and those numerical values can describe an elevation, usually in meters or in feet. And by default, if you're downloading it fresh from a GIS server, most likely the elevation data is going to be in meters. Next we have our vectors, sometimes called features, and vector data is often represented in the form of points, lines, and polygons. So of course, when you have 2 points in space that are connected, that forms a line. When you have 3 points in space connected and there's lines in between that can make a surface, that is often called a polygon. So in rasters we can have surfaces, such as the one that we see here. In vectors we can also have a surface as well, but in vector form we often call those tins or triangulated irregular networks, which also forms a surface, which is somewhat similar to rasters. It can represent surface information. So the term surface is kind of generically used here. Vectors often have an attribute table. Rasters can have an attribute table as well, but most of the time you can expect to find kind of like an Excel spreadsheet behind vector data. So once you have your data added to your data frame, you can actually examine the different types of data here. And one thing that we may want to examine is the specific data types. So again, there are these check boxes here to the left that you can check and uncheck to turn layers on and off. Right now my topmost layer is my soil, so I'm going to right click on that and go to Open Attribute Table. Busy drawing everything in the background right now. So in our attribute table, it kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet somewhat. You're going to have some columns here and some records with information. And as you go through and select things in here, it will also, notice right here, it'll select that exact feature in our map. So if I select something else, it'll highlight something else somewhere else. Let's move this over here to the left so we can actually see. So there we go, it selected that. So each of these records actually represents a geospatial piece of information here in our map. You can go through and select things. So we can see all of the different properties about our soil here in our attribute table. Again, everything is abbreviated due to that naming limitation that we have in ArcGIS. Since this particular soil data was developed from the Web Soil Survey site, you could probably simply just go out to the Web Survey Soil site and quickly determine what all of these abbreviations actually mean. So some of this will be quite useful to you. We get a lot of soil properties and chemical properties. That can be very useful when doing different types of analysis, especially when determining suitability or vulnerability analysis for a particular type of use. So now let's go find something that is a raster. So that's down here at the bottom. We also have our aerial photography. So if you right click on it, sometimes they may have an attribute table, sometimes not. You can view individual pieces of data in a raster by using the identify tool down here at the bottom. If I click on this, and if I click somewhere, right now it's going to select the very topmost layer, which is my soil. So I can actually click this drop down and choose a layer that I want to identify. So maybe my topography here. And I really can't see my topography since it's hidden underneath, so I'll just click somewhere here and it'll get it. So this spot that I happen to click, we can't really see it because underneath all of these layers, but that particular spot that I had selected is 386.292664 meters. So notice that I have this thing selected here, and maybe you don't want to have any features selected, and you can do that by simply going again down here to our bar where we have select feature and clear selected feature. So I'll choose clear selected feature, which will deselect things. And you also notice that my cursor is in this kind of identify mode. So I want to get out of that too. So I can go over here and just click my normal cursor, which is on select feature mode, and that will get out of my identify tool selector mode.